So, classical versus operant conditioning. The big thing is that operant conditioning is a voluntary response. Classical conditioning elicits an involuntary response. Pavlov's dog is the normal example, all right, where you have a dog, you have food. Of course, you're going to salivate. Whenever you get the food, you hear a bell. And so now that bell is associated with food. So when you hear the bell, you start to salivate. Here's my own example. You have a sad movie. You have a natural response. You end up crying. Now at the same time, this is presented in conjunction with a clown honk. Beep, beep. And so you've been watching all these sad movies, and every time you cry, you get a clown honk. So theoretically, every time you hear this clown honk, you start crying. Operant conditioning, it's where you have all this stuff here. Reinforcement, punishment, and the idea is just to get you to do something in an obvious way. So like when a baby cries, you either ignore it to get it to stop, or you, you pick it up to get it to stop or something. You're not going through like this secondary means to get what you want. Now, the test is going to test you on this by saying operant conditioning or positive reinforcement would be by X, Y, Z, alpha, beta, or something. And you'll have to choose. They're not going to say, this is an example of classical conditioning. This is an example of operant conditioning, because then you only have two options. So anyway, why did I connect positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, and negative punishment? Well, let's quickly take a look at what ends up happening. With reinforcement, the net result is always good. So whatever's happening, it's something good. And punishment, the net result is always bad. Reinforcement, if it's positive, it means you give something. If it's negative, it means you take it away. Same thing with punishment. So let's go through some examples for positive reinforcement. You do well on a test. You give someone a candy bar. You do poorly on a test. You take away their bedtime curfew. Okay. So there for reinforcement, the negative reinforcement. Remember, the target goal is always a good thing. And for negative, you end up removing a bad thing. For positive reinforcement, you end up adding a good thing. Well, let's look at negative punishment. So for negative punishment, again, since it's punishment, the net result is always bad. We're going to remove something to have a bad result. So we would say, for example, oh, I'm going to get rid of your laptop because you got a bad grade. Or I'm, going to beat the hell out of you. Positive punishments. You're not removing something, you're adding something with a bad net result. And then for extinction, I like to think of mob relationships, because in the mob you're always paying someone off, and then when, at least in movies, you stop paying them off, they're not your friends anymore, and then you get a hit put on you and you die. All right, transference and countertransference. Again, straightforward. I like how transference, you can remember transference versus countertransference, and that countertransference is obviously a condition of transference. If you think about it, that like transference is the norm and countertransference is like you're just adding something to it. And I think of it this way because transference would be normal. Countertransference is abnormal. And it's abnormal for doctors to do this. You can say, oh, it's normal for patients to feel, to place some sort of importance, project feelings on a doctor. But it's counterintuitive for a doctor to do that. So that's how I think of countertransference. Okay. So let's go down here to acting out. denial, displacement, and dissociation. Denial and dissociation are kind of similar. So in denial, you just refuse to admit something. But it's not like in movies or something where someone's playing basketball, they lose, and you know, his friends are just like, hey, I saw you lost that game, man. He's like, well, I didn't lose that game. You know, the example that they give is really good, and it's something you will see on the test. You know, well, they'll ask you, hey, is this an example of dissociation, acting out, denial, displacement, reaction formation, which we'll cover later. You just completely ignore something. But, a lot of these things end up being subconscious. In dissociation, you're not just ignoring something. You turn into a completely different person. You're this person with all these experiences that are dots, and then you just turn into some blank slate when you're confronted with a specific thing. The example they give is when someone who's been abused is confronted by his or her abuser. That's a pretty good one. They also have examples later on, like a dissociative fugue, where you find yourself, or your family finds you 3 days later, 60 miles away, and you have no idea how you got there. The person who ended up doing those things is completely different from the person who was there before. It's just such an extraordinary shift in terms of what one person would do to another, that you literally are dissociated from yourself. Okay, well, let's talk about acting out and displacement. Displacement is probably the easiest thing. Something bad happens to you, you do that to someone else. So typically on test questions, they'll give you an example of someone in a position of power over you will do something, and you'll do it to someone, over whom you have some position of power. It'll be something like you got fired, and so you beat the hell out of your kid. Or it'll be something like, you got a rough home life, so you go home and bully your classmates. That's what displacement is. Okay. Acting out. Well, acting out is exactly what you think of when sometimes you think of like teenagers and stuff, but it's in a more serious way, I think. So the way you do it and the way that they'll ask you questions is that they'll actually end up doing things along gender lines. So for example, let's say someone's dad just died. Okay, so you end up using actions rather than dealing with feelings because you don't want to have any discomfort. You want to avoid discomfort. So in the question, if it's a guy, his dad just died, he'll go out to a bar and he'll just like start a fight. Okay, he doesn't want to sit down and be contemplative or something. And when it's a girl, she's in high school or something, her dad just died, so she'll just go to parties and we'll drink and we'll do like stuff like that. That's typically how the questions will be phrased. And if you think about it in terms of, movie tropes, girl goes out with like a bad guy, she's just acting out. She doesn't know how to deal with her emotions. The guy goes out and he just starts a fight. Yeah. All right, so this was pretty dense, but I think we got through it all. Remember, reinforcement, net results always good. Punishment, net results always bad. Negative or positive has to do with whether you're removing something, negative, or adding something, positive. Okay.